Not long ago, I was speaking at a student conference, and afterwards, a young man came up to me who was deeply troubled about the idea of hell. He just couldn't reconcile that a loving God would send a good person to hell. I did my best to answer his questions, and we talked probably 30, 40 minutes, and then it dawned on me. His problem was he viewed people as being essentially good. He kind of looked at God as if God is looking down. If someone does the slightest small thing, that person goes to hell for eternity. He viewed it as if there's a few really bad people like Hitler out there, but the rest of us are essentially good. And so hell seemed like total overkill. Although it might surprise you, I actually agree with him in the sense that it would be total overkill for God to send a good person to hell. But the problem is, the Bible has a very different view of human nature. In Romans chapter 3, Paul says that no one is righteous, no one is good. All have turned away from God. And in Mark chapter 7, Jesus says, it is the heart that is fallen, the heart is corrupt. God doesn't send good people to hell because no one is good. History also supports this theological claim. G.K. Chesterton once said that original sin, the brokenness of mankind, is the one doctrine that can be proven outside of the Bible. And I think he's right. All we have to do is look at the history of mankind, and it's clear that something is desperately broken with human beings. A colleague of mine, Dr. Clay Jones, has studied human evil and suffering as much as anybody who's alive. And to avoid the claim that his critics would make that he took the easy way out, he decided to study evil in depth in the 20th century. And he began with the assumption that evil was done by just a few deranged individuals. But what he found stunned him. What he found, that it wasn't just the Pol Pots and the Hitlers that contributed to evil, but masses of human beings under the right circumstances and the right times did and practiced great acts of evil. What he found was that human beings are deeply wicked. Let's look at just a few examples from the 20th century. Take the Chinese government, for example, responsible for at least the deaths of 25 to 30 million people. Take the Russians, responsible for starving out at least 6 million Ukrainians. And the Japanese government brutalized at least 300,000 Chinese in what's called the Rape of Nanjing, in a way that even Nazis looking on were horrified. And let's face it, in American culture, tens of millions of abortions and even the practice of eugenics. The point is that mass evil is not done by individuals. But what Dr. Jones found, I think, is right. Human beings are desperately corrupt. We are deeply fallen. God doesn't send good people to hell because nobody is truly good. When evil things happen, we often hear people describe it as inhumane. Well, my father taught me when I was younger, he'd say, son, don't describe acts like that as inhumane, because inhumane means not human. He'd say, son, it's humans who do that. And he's right. Whether we turn on the daily news or we look throughout the history of the world, it's human beings who have done and continue to do evil things. You might be thinking, okay, so nobody is truly good. But why would God send anybody to hell? Part of the answer is that God doesn't send people to hell. If C.S. Lewis is right in his classic book, The Great Divorce, God doesn't send people to hell, people choose it. In fact, towards the end of that book, he famously says, in the end, there's two kinds of people. Those whom say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. All who are in hell choose it. I have a good friend who's clinging to a particular sin in his life. And I'll never forget when he once told me that he would not stop practicing this sin, even if it meant that God would condemn him to hell for eternity. There's a well-known atheist who died recently, and he passed around news for everybody shortly before his death. He said, if any story comes out after I die that I converted on my bedside, that story is false. I will not believe in God. Friends, human autonomy is strong. God has given us free will, and we are stubborn. Many of us don't want to believe in God and all that it entails to follow after Him. But you know what? God is a respecter of persons. If people choose not to believe in God, God is not going to force them to believe in Him. Please realize the existence of hell brings no pleasure to God. Medieval depictions of people being tortured mercilessly and endlessly, and somehow God reveling in this with pleasure, are false. Hell is a terrible place. We have been designed to be in a relationship with God and relationship with other people. And in hell, all of that is lost. But in Ezekiel 18, verse 23, God asks this. He says, "Do I have any pleasure in the death of the wicked? Would I not rather that they turn from their wicked ways and live?" You might be wondering, well, why can't God just forgive? If God can do anything, can't He just announce that we're forgiven? Well, yes, God can do anything, but He can do anything consistent with His moral nature. God is the holy, righteous judge of the universe. Therefore, He can't be indifferent to sin. But what God has done is even better. You see, He's offered the death of His Son, Jesus Christ, who lived a perfect, sinless life as an act of love towards us, but also as an act of justice. So the question is, are we willing to accept the free offer of salvation, the free offer of forgiveness that God has to offer to each one of us? Let's face it, hell is a troubling thought. I don't like the idea of hell. The thought that some of my friends or family, loved ones, or really anybody could end up in hell is a disturbing thought. When it's all said and done, to me, there's one compelling reason to believe that hell is real. Jesus taught about the reality of hell. And Jesus had the most authority and clarity of vision of anybody who's ever lived. As a sinless Son of God who performed miracles and rose from the grave, Jesus had the authority to teach about hell. If Jesus was willing to talk about it and warn people lovingly about the possibility of hell, how could we do any differently?